Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next speaker, Wojciech Pituła, presenting the topic, Communication for Developers, Estimates, Code Reviews, and Other Hard Problems.
Hi everyone. I kind of really hoped AI would read my name. That would be funny. But it is what it is. Glad to see all of you here. I hope you will have a good nap. I skipped lunch for that particular reason, because if I ate, I would fall asleep, and that would be right now, and that would be a little bit awkward. But anyway, let's begin. Okay, I needed slides so I can black them out. What do we do as software developers? We write code. We test that code. We sometimes even design something. We have some kind of architecture. We deploy that code. But throughout all those activities, we talk. We talk a lot. We talk with our fellow developers about the code we have written. Maybe we talk with the QA about how we have tested that code. Maybe we talk about the architecture that we have designed. We talk with product about the problems we have solved, right? But then I realized that we never, or very rarely, talk about all this talking and think about all this talking. And this is why I decided to do this talk. Initially, I wanted to share tips, tricks, teach you something about effective communication, but then I realized I'm squeezing something like 3 days workshop into a 40-minute talk. So my goal is a little bit different. I just want you to be a little bit more aware of the communication you do every day as software developer. I will still share tips and tricks, but the goal is just awareness. So I also wanted to introduce myself, but then I realized it's not exactly relevant for this talk. So what is relevant is that I read quite a lot. Some of those books were about psychology in general, some about communication in particular. What is also important, I talk a lot, and what's even worse, I don't know when to shut up. If you ask my manager, you will learn that probably all my failures through all the last few years were related to communication. I don't blow up production, I just screw up code. So then I thought, okay, maybe I need to step up the game a little bit. I like to think about myself as average communicator, but at the same time, the baseline is not exactly high, so I'm decently communicating software developer. Okay, that's it. That's it. Let's talk a little bit about the communication. You might be aware of Shannon communication model. It comes from information theory. It's about machine-to-machine communication. There is a sender, it produces a message gets encoded, decoded, received, boring. Okay, so how does it translate to human communication? There is something you want to say. Okay, you have a thought, you have some kind of a message you want to pass. So you put words around it and either write it down or say them, but you basically communicate it. Then those words gets interpreted, and the other side formulates a thought or understanding in their head. Okay, so the goal of communication is to make the both sides equal. So what the other side thinks you wanted to say is the same that you said. Okay, as simple as that. And that's enough of theory. Let's jump to some examples in practice. Estimates. Who has ever had to estimate anything? Please raise your hand. Perfect. Whole. And who had issues related to that? I think the same subset of people. And you may ask why this is a communication problem. So let's think about this hypothetical scenario. PM comes and asks when this will be done. Okay, and developer answers in around a week. Okay, and what happened is that PM understood in a week we will have that feature running in production for our whole user base. And what developer really meant was, okay, if I drop everything right now and don't do any operational things, and if everything goes smoothly, then maybe in a week I will have an open pull request. And maybe tests in that pull requests. Okay, so you can clearly see there is like the same words mean different things for different people. So how can we do that? First, we need to understand what is the goal of estimating things. We have to provide a number, value that has the same meaning for both sides. And to do that, we need to understand why the other side needs that number, because there is quite a lot of reasons to be asked for an estimate. There might be a promise made to someone, be it a user or a regulator. There might be a market opportunity you want to catch. There might be some internal planning happening, or not even planning, but just prioritization. You have two tasks, you need to wait which one is bigger and then compare it with impact and choose one. Okay, more often than not, there is no reason at all. Someone just thought it's a good idea to ask for an estimate, but they don't really need it. And that brings us to the first very important point about communication. You cannot communicate effectively without understanding the other side. So this is something that we'll repeat over and over during this talk. Okay, so how can we communicate effectively the estimate? My advice is be very, very explicit. And what does it mean? We start with a scope. We say, what are we going to estimate? Let's say we estimate in developer days, so we say how much work time it is. So our estimate. Okay. Then we explicitly mention the uncertainty factor. So how many unknown things are inside that estimate? This can be something from 1.1 to 5. Okay, and you multiply the dev days by this number. Okay, then you say what is your assumed developer assignment and developer availability, because you might have 1 or 5 developers and your developer might spend 1 day a week on this task or 5. Okay, and then you repeat what will be the end result and by when it will be delivered. And if you do that, you expose a lot of information that can be discussed. So if someone disagrees with your estimate, they can point to the fragment they disagree with. Okay, so maybe they disagree with the raw estimate of dev days, but maybe they disagree with uncertainty factor. They thought that, okay, we did it 500 times, there should be no uncertainty. And then you can have a discussion about that. And this is an example. I don't think it's very interesting, but yes, 55 man days, 1 to 1.2, 4 days a week, 1 developer, and then you calculate the date. Now, a small detour. Estimate versus commitment. Those two things are very, very different, and the misunderstanding about those two words are, for me, the most common source of issues. When you estimate something, you need to be very clear that this is just an estimate. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean I will start doing something. Okay? It's just a number that I think it can be done in that amount of days or story points or whatever. Commitment is estimate in practice. It means like I estimated and now I commit to doing that in that time. Okay, so pay attention. And this brings us to the second important point: words matter. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do, as you have just seen. Okay, we're done with estimates. Now we go to implementation. And to do any kind of implementation, we have to have discussions with the business. And one thing that is particularly important when you discuss with the widely understood business, so product or any other non-technical department, you have to adjust your language. What does it mean? You don't say words like pull request, commit, branch, deployment, high availability. Those people probably don't understand those terms. Okay? You have to focus on what they understand. And that brings us to the third point that is very important. Always adjust the content to the audience. You can say the same thing on five different ways depending on to whom you're speaking. Okay, let's go forward. Code comments. And you may wonder why it's a communication concern. It is because comments are messages into the future. You write something today and someone reads it in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now. And to communicate that effectively, you have to imagine what might be needed in those 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now. So you have to imagine what the person reading your comments might need from you. And this is why we often say that comments should focus on why and not what. Okay, because what is in the comment, they see in the code, they see it, but what they don't see is why you have written what you have written. And the side comment to that, I strongly believe humor is valuable. Everyone who had found a joke in a comment, especially during the long day of debugging, knows what I'm talking about. It's just a good practice to put a little bit of humor into the code. Error messages. Another message into the future. You write it today, someone will see it. It's special circumstances at some time in the future, and now you have to imagine what they might need. So you can say that operation is unsupported. This is a true statement, but it doesn't give you anything. Or you can say that can't update address of an inactive user. This provides much more information, makes it much more actionable for the audience of your message. Okay. Breadcrumbs. Sooner than later, you will need to do a little bit of code archaeology. You have to figure out why something was done as it was done. And then it is important to help that person who's doing the investigation right now. And the way to do it is to leave breadcrumbs behind you. Okay, what are breadcrumbs? Links to GitHub issues, Stack Overflow questions, Jira tickets, GitHub commits, branches, Slack conversations, everything you can think of that is relevant to the things you're doing. Try to link it together, because the person doing the archaeology will thank you a lot. Okay, another important topic, a little bit controversial, built in the open. When you do something, you never know who might be interested in what you're doing, who might be affected by it. And you don't know if you're not missing something. Maybe someone did exactly the same thing just yesterday. Or maybe you're trying to do something that 10 people before figure out it cannot be done. Or maybe you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Okay. And if you don't communicate enough about what you're doing, you will not learn that. So yes, the simple answer is just use Slack channels and meeting notes instead of direct messages, and that's probably good enough. But we'll talk about this a little bit later because it's more complicated. Keep people in the loop. Our job as software developers is to write maintainable software. If you fall under the bus, the software can no longer be maintained. If you didn't share your knowledge. Your job is to not be irreplaceable. Okay? It's as simple as that. So communicate a lot and share a lot of what you're doing. Coordinating releases. You might confuse release and deployment, especially in smaller organizations. This is the same thing. You deploy something, the feature gets released. In more complicated environments, it's something else entirely, because you want to deploy often, but you want to release in a coordinated fashion, because it might, given feature might affect multiple departments, especially non-technical ones like compliance, legal, operations, support, anything. And then the releases needs to be coordinated. And if you're lucky, there's someone else doing that. It can be a product manager, project manager, program manager, release manager. There's a lot of managers. But if not, it might be the developer who built it. Okay. And then a little bit of advice here: just put a Slack thread, a bunch of emojis and bullet points, and that's it. Just update them as people report that they like report handshakes, and yeah, you're done. Great. We've implemented our great feature. Now we open a pull request. Our goal is to get our code reviewed and accepted. And how do we make that happen? The first thing we need to do is to find the reviewers. Okay. And the important point here is that you need as many reviewers, but not more. Because if you ask too many people for review, especially your, for example, your whole team, something called diffusion of responsibility steps in, and everyone thinks someone else will do it, and no one does it, and then you wait 2 weeks for your review. Okay, so target very specific people, and like if you need 1 approval, maybe ask 2 people. Okay, if you need 2 approvals, ask 3 people, and stuff like that. Another advice: put a deadline. Like communicate to your reviewers by what time you want this to be reviewed. Okay, so something like, this is a PR. I would like to have. I would like to merge it by Friday. Okay, it's just your intent, but then they can adjust their planning, like fit it in before Friday, or they can tell you, I will not have time, find someone else, and that's perfectly fine. But without that information, this is not possible to happen. Okay. Here is the example. Not really important, but one of those 2 messages has significantly higher chance of getting a fast review. Another thing: if you want your PR to be reviewed, you might have to make it reviewer friendly. And what does it mean? Usually it means it has to be small. Unfortunately, I'm completely incapable of doing small PRs. And so if you're like me, let's look for another ways to make it reviewer friendly if the change is big. Okay, so the first thing is description. Write what the PR is about, just be brief. If you write a wall of text, no one will read it, you haven't helped anyone. Highlight the most important pieces. Like if you modified 100 files, but the important change is in 2 of them, put comments yourself on the PR on those files, saying why those changes are important, so the reviewers can easily find them. Clarify what is the state of PR. Okay, so you can mark it as draft, but maybe it's not draft, but you still need to manually test it, right? So write in the description the to-dos that you're still intending to do with that PR, so the reviewers can act accordingly. Okay, now a bit controversial topic. I don't want to start a holy war, but if you like a clean Git log, then rebase before or after creating the PR. But when the PR is open and being reviewed, you shouldn't do any force pushes. Why? Because that's what reviewers see. The same commit message repeated over and over, and they have completely no clue what happened. Okay, so no force pushes in general, no amendments, nothing, because you're messing up for your reviewers. Okay, speaking of the reviewers, now we're the one. Our goal is to give a good review. And not only that, we also don't want to make more enemies that we already have. And that's pretty hard. Okay, so the first advice, level of give a fuck. Not all comments are made equal. Some of them are more important than others. And you can say that explicitly. Unfortunately, there is no standard, at least I haven't seen one, but you can figure it out. Having said that, there is a thing that has standards, and that's conventional comments. You can check the page for details, but basically those are just prefixes with clearly defined semantics that you put on the comments to communicate your intent. Is it a question? Does it have to be done? Is it a nitpick or stuff like that? You have a good resource to help you. Okay, now probably the hardest point of this presentation. Don't be a jerk. Okay, that's hard, I know. We're always sometimes a bit of a jerky. But how do we not be? First thing, propose solutions. If you spot a problem, for example, you don't like the name of some variable, don't say it's a bad name. Try to provide alternatives. If you cannot think of an alternative, write it down. Like, okay, this name is bad, but I can't think of a better one. Maybe someone else has an idea. Okay, just say that you thought about it. The second thing, offer help. If you see that someone is struggling with the PR, they apply fix after fix and no fix is good enough, then stop commenting, reach out, offer per programming or some other way of helping them. Like, be a good person. Show empathy. Okay, so you see that someone created a PR and is applying fixes for the last 2 weeks. Okay, and all the comments are valid and the fixes are okay, but then for some reason the process doesn't end. Okay, so you need to understand that no one wants to have a pull request open for 2 weeks. They want to have their task done. Okay, and showing empathy is just about understanding that and trying to help them get their goal, merging that PR. Okay, maybe it will never be merged because it's too hard or something, but like, yeah, they feel bad. You need to understand that. And related comment, pick your battles. As I said, not all comments are equal, not all issues are of the same importance. So sometimes it's important to let people fail. Okay? People make mistakes, they learn on those mistakes. And if you're a senior engineer and you do a lot of pull requests and you find a lot of issues, you need to understand when it's time to acknowledge that issue and go with it. Like, let the pull request author do that and see that it will backfire. Okay, it's your job to prepare the system, to write the system in a way that this will not compromise your business. Okay, so they can make a mistake, but you know that mitigation processes and means are in place, so you allow person to do something stupid. Okay, done with pull requests. Now let's talk a little bit about our general topic of everyday communication. Hello. Yeah, that was a little bit awkward, right? Okay, don't do that. That's exactly what you're doing when you write a single hello on Slack or any other communicator and wait for a response. Just don't. Write what you want. Okay, if you need more justification, go to that page and read, but just don't. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Something you need to understand is that people will misunderstand you, misremember, don't read your messages, misinterpret them, forget, and all of those is normal. This will happen. And the simplest mean to fight with it is repeat what you have said sometime before. Don't get frustrated. Just repeat in different words. The only thing you can do is to think, okay, can I repeat it in a way that will minimize the chance of the other person misremembering or like misinterpreting that. So try to look for ways to improve your message, but don't be frustrated that you have to repeat things over and over. That is normal. How to get a response? You ask a question and you need to get a response. And that's something we already talked about when we talked about pull requests. So let's dive a little bit into that. You have to target your messages because of diffusion of responsibility we already talked about. If you don't know who might have answered to your question, ping someone. Okay, they might don't know, but they might know who knows. Okay, so if you really need an answer, ping someone, because otherwise you might just be broadcasting into the void. Explain why you need a given piece of information or a given task done. There's an interesting psychological study called Xerox study done by the Ellen Langner, where she proved that giving any justification for skipping a line in front of a copy machine increases your chances significantly. And what is important is any justification. It doesn't have to make any sense. Like she did something like, excuse me, can I skip the line because I have to copy this document? It's obvious, like we're in front of copy machine. But still, it was like significant numbers. I don't remember, but like from 40 to 70 or percent like success rate, like really significant. So just explain why you need stuff. And then explain when you need it. We talked about it with the pull request. Say when you want, by what time you need that piece of information, that task, so people can act accordingly. And here is an example. You can say, hey, where can I find CPU usage metrics, right? Send it on the channel and hope for the best. Or you can say, hey, I need to get CPU usage of our servers. Not sure who can help me with this, but maybe Tiago? We are releasing a CPU heavy feature on Wednesday and I need to prepare the setup. Okay, I can guarantee one of those two messages will have higher success rate. Now, the important point. Give the responses you want to get. What does it mean? If you see a question and you don't know the answer, but you know who might have it, be proactive, ping them. Okay, be helpful. If you are asked to do something and you don't have time, say this. Okay, don't ignore the message. Just say, sorry, I don't have time. And this should be fine. The person asking just need to adjust. Maybe they will find someone else. Maybe they will change their plans. Just they need to know. If you have time, but not exactly now, maybe like tomorrow or in the afternoon or something, then also say this. Okay, So they know you have seen, you've put it to your backlog, you will look into it. If you started looking at the problem and then you realized, okay, I will not have the answer in like next minute or two, also write this down. So the person knows that you're looking. No one else will try to answer the same thing. And yeah, the person asking just gets some kind of a response. Adjust the tones. I know it's uncomfortable, especially in Eastern Europe, but people as a species, evolved to prefer smiles. So we have to smile. And that's sometimes awkward or unnatural, or yeah, but it will make your life easier. Like, we have to smile. If you have to force yourself to smile, do it. It's just how human brains work. What you shouldn't do is to be overly enthusiastic, because that can be very, very bad. If everything is awesome, then nothing is, and you have no space to actually express that something is awesome. Yeah. Adjust the tone the other way. And that's the slide that I spent a lot of time on, and I wasn't sure if I should put it here. Because yes, some messages needs to be harsh, but it's very, very tricky to figure out which of them. Okay, it's probably better to not do it than to write down a harsh message that shouldn't be one. Okay, so try never use this negative, harsh words or be grumpy, but be aware that okay, in some specific circumstances that is allowed. It's not like you have to always be super positive. Formatting. That's something special for the asynchronous communication. If you write something, it has to be easy to scan. Okay? People are busy and typically will not read what you write. It doesn't matter if it's a Slack message or a documentation or an email, doesn't matter. People are busy, they might not read your message. So how to increase the chances of it being read? It has to be easy to scan. What does it mean to be easy to scan? Put TLDR on the top. It applies everywhere. Blog articles, Slack messages, documentation, just express what this piece of content is about in one sentence, so the reader can understand if they should read it or not. Bold then the essence. If there are important phrases in the content, the things that, okay, if the reader doesn't read anything else, they should at least look at those few words to get their attention and maybe trigger a full scan. Okay, so bolden those phrases that are important. Use bullet points. Okay, so if you have a lot of things to communicate, don't write a wall of text. Write bullet points, then the person can scan each bullet point, like the beginning of it, and see if it's relevant. And then don't overdo it, because if you do, then your message starts to look like a clown and no one wants it. Calls, meetings, we love them. Okay, but meetings are costly, inconvenient, annoying, and effective. That's a sad truth. Okay, so yes, most of us don't like meetings, but there are many, many cases where you can communicate more effectively synchronously than asynchronously. And you need to understand when is the time for which. Yeah, understanding that can be pretty tricky. Be gentle with pings. I told you a lot of time to target your messages, right? So you have to mention someone to get a response. And now is a counterweight to that. Be gentle with pings, because you cause a notification on the other side. And of course, it's on the receiver to manage their notifications. If they need focus, they should put a focus mode on and ignore notifications, okay? Just be aware that your actions have consequences for the other side. And that's pretty much it. We can now talk about more general things that can contribute to different scenarios. And the first principle of effective communication is understanding. You cannot communicate effectively if you don't understand the other side. Okay? This means you need to know what product understands, what words they use. You need to understand legal. Like if you talk with lawyers, you need to understand how they think. If you talk with compliance, you need to understand how they think. You need to understand your audience. And then if you understand your audience, you need to understand the message. And sometimes you can take, like, let's say you're asked when this will be done. Okay. And maybe there is something more to it. Maybe someone is annoyed of how long it's taking. Okay. But maybe they are just interested. They have completely no feelings about it. Okay. So you need to know how to understand each message. From the other side, you need to ensure that the message was understood. You're not UDP. You cannot broadcast messages and hope for the best. Okay? Human-to-human communication, as effective one, is TCP. Like you need to get confirmation that your message was received and understood, and ensuring that is pretty hard. Adjusting content to the audience, so you understand how the audience feels, thinks, feels. Then you change the wording, you change the message for that particular audience. Don't be a jerk. Okay? Yeah, just remember. Okay. Sadly, formalities, conventions, smiles matter. And sometimes we just have to force ourselves to follow them, even if we don't have time or energy. Yes, language. If you use simple but correct language, the risk you face is that you will not be precise enough. Okay? And that can be fixed with more words. If you use too sophisticated language and words that are not likely to be understood, then you risk not being understood entirely, and the other person might not have the courage to ask you to rephrase or say I don't understand, and they will just assume something that is wrong and then do something, and then your product blows up. So yes, use simple language unless you know the other side is native English speaker or close to being one, and then you can use more sophisticated words. Brevity matters. Something I mentioned before. The longer the message, the less likely it will be read in full. Okay, so if you want your messages to be read, if you want your documentation to be read, just make it short. Okay, and easy to scan, but short. And it matters a lot in code comments and documentation, which are basically the same thing. My personal take is no one reads documentation. We had a good talk, I think yesterday, about how to write good documentation. If you haven't seen, I strongly encourage to watch the video, but yes, maybe you can write a good documentation, but even if you do, some people will still not read it and just try to go without it. And the shorter the documentation is, the bigger the chance that someone will actually make the effort. Communicate in the open. Another thing we already mentioned a little bit. And yes, it's easier to ignore the message than to play a telepath. I would say infinitely easier, unless there was some serious breakthrough on that front. And this means use channels, write meeting notes, don't communicate in indirect messages. And that's it. That is not easy. It creates noise. It requires a proper setup, like channels that will have clearly defined goals and focused conversations. And even if you have all that set up, people still have tendency to communicate in private. That's just human nature, and that's fine. You just need to make it as easy as possible and as normal as possible to communicate in the open. One of the last things, all the things I have told you, all the tricks, tips, practices cost effort. Effort is time, time is money. Okay, so you need to understand when you need to be more effective and when you can skip all that fluff and just be very, very direct, to the point, and with minimal amount of words, let's say. And the final thing, if you think that you know something about the communication, like you learn the practices, you communicate well, then read that book and you will learn that you know nothing, probably because communication is a very culture-specific thing. People from the US communicate differently than people from Western Europe, then those different than people from Eastern Europe, and then those different than people from Asia. So there are very significant differences that you might need to understand if you work in multicultural environment. Okay, I prepared you a list of resources, so the books or other stuff that you might want to read if you want. You don't have to take pictures because you will have links to this link to the slides in the next one. Here it is. So we're at the end. Please remember that communication is everywhere. My name was Wojciech Pituła. Thanks a lot. If we have time for questions, I'm happy to.
Yes, we don't have too much time, but for maybe one or two questions, definitely. And the rest of the questions, I hope you will be able to answer at Ask Me Anything corner. Yeah,
Definitely.
So, okay, let's go with the most popular one. What can be done when a reviewer is not giving approval? BC of a typo in a commit message. He doesn't see importance of delivering the FTR over a typo.
Okay, that's a good question. I would say take it easy and just fix the typo. Like pick your battles. I hope it's not that hard. Okay. If I get address the spirit of the question more, like if there is something small, like have an honest conversation. Like explain to the reviewer that you want to have it done. Okay. Try to understand why they focus so much on that small thing. Maybe what you think is a small thing is really not small. You're not seeing something. So just try to understand from where the other side is coming from. That's my answer.
Anonymous have a question. What would you do if a colleague does not want to adapt the PR review habits?
I assume you tried once, twice, 3 times and give feedback and this doesn't work. Then I think the only thing you can really do is to escalate to your manager. Hopefully they can help you understand what might be wrong, because not necessarily issue is on their side, but they can also have conversation with the other party and explain to them. Like, this is why I particularly like the individual contributor versus manager split. Is like manager is supposed to be good at this kind of things. Okay, so if you exhausted all your means, try to get help. Don't complain. Don't say this person is wrong. They are stopping my PRs. Do something with it. No, just try to get help from your manager. Explain what your problem is, and then think together of what you can do.